Good afternoon, everybody. It's a cloudy Friday, and I wanted first of all to tell all of our families how much we miss you. All of the teachers this week and their principals and the entire administrative team has hoped that you've worked really hard this week. You've enjoyed some of the virtual lessons. It's a different world for everybody right now, isn't it? And I know that when you wake up in the morning and you think about what a school day is supposed to look like, what we're doing now is very, very different. And at first, it was so different for everyone that we were all a little scared, a little nervous, and we were all a little anxious about what our schools and our classrooms would look like. And so it took a couple of days for us to figure out that just because we're all home doesn't mean we still can't attend school. And although we have the school buildings closed right now, we still have schooling going on for all of us. And so this week was an exciting week. It was something that I've never done before. And I've been in public schools for 35 years. Never before have I ever done anything remote like this. And so it's unusual. And anytime something's unusual, it makes us feel a little nervous. But I'm hoping that as each day passes and we get a little more comfortable with our virtual lessons and virtual school, and you and your teachers get to talk and Zoom and YouTube and connect in all of those ways that are so important, that eventually we'll get back to our school and we'll feel safe and sound. And that's what it's about. So you might be able to hear in the other room that's one of our Chihuahuas. Here on the Williams Farmette, we have 2 goats, we have 5 dogs, we have 2 cats, and we have an aquarium. And that doesn't count all of the wildlife that runs around the farm area. And one of our little dogs, his name is Peanut, he's very vocal. And he's 13 years old, and he stares out the window and wants to bark at everything that passes by. So you may hear him from time to time chime in, and we'll just keep right on going with our recipes today. So what I thought we would do today is, first of all, I put on my gloves. Of course, we're all being safe. We want to make sure we're always safe, not only with food, but safe with a variety of things these days. And what I thought we would do today is prepare something that we eat here at home on a regular basis. It's something that is very enjoyable for our family, and that is a biscuit recipe. And our biscuit recipe is very standard, and the recipe is able to be modified in many different ways. And the cool thing about biscuits, not the kind that you get in a tube, but the kind that you actually make from scratch, is that they can be eaten in the morning for breakfast with a variety of toppings or eggs or any kind of fruits and vegetables that you enjoy. They can be eaten with a later meal, and they can be eaten even as dessert with just a slight modification. So what I thought we'd do today is I would show you how to make biscuits from scratch, and then while those biscuits are baking in the oven back here, I thought what we would also do is make a shortbread recipe for dessert, which is just a slight modification of a basic biscuit recipe. So you'll see what I have here to prepare, if you can see. First of all, I have my pastry board. It's called a pastry board because on the bottom there are feet, so that as you are kneading the dough or you're making pastries or biscuits or cookies, you'll see that it stands up and you get a nice solid footing. This particular board was handmade. We bought it up in Maine one summer, and it's a very special board, and we use it just for special occasions like today. I also have here for the biscuits, what I call it's a biscuit cutter. I remember growing up on a farm as a young boy when my mother would make biscuits for us. She had one of those really old-fashioned ones. It was about the same diameter, but it had a little handle, and I can still see her today pressing out the biscuits. If you don't have an actual biscuit cutter to make biscuits, it doesn't matter. You can use an actual metal can. So those kinds of metal cans that you get canned foods in, whether it's fruit cocktail or green beans, if you cut off both ends with a can opener, you have a nice biscuit cutter that can be used that way. I remember my father used to use a can, would cut it just like that, and he would use it not only for biscuits, but he would also use it for strawberries. He never liked to slice strawberries. He would cap them, put them in a big bowl, quart after quart, and he would take a big metal can and he would slice them all up very quickly and easily. So if you don't have a biscuit cutter, you can use a metal can, and it can be modified to do the trick. So that will be where we make our biscuits. You'll see to my right that we've pre-measured the ingredients for the biscuit recipe today. So what I have here is about 2 cups of flour. Then we've got about half a teaspoon of salt. And we've got 3 teaspoons of baking powder that will give the biscuits the ability to rise. Once we mix in all of the dry ingredients, then I'll be showing you how to cut in 6 tablespoons of butter. I prefer butter over shortening. Either can be used, but butter I think gives it a better taste, and I like the consistency. And then of course, once we're finished, then we'll add about 3/4 of a cup of milk. And as you can see, these are the 5 very simple, basic recipes. There are no eggs involved. And so you can modify these to make them the way you wish. You can use whole milk or 2%. You can even use 1% or skim. You can use the type of butter that you enjoy, a light butter if you prefer. Baking soda is pretty standard, and salt, you always have an option of going, baking powder, I'm sorry. Melissa just corrected me. It happens a lot here in the Williams household. So you have the basic baking powder, and then of course we have the salt, which can be regular or light. This is regular. And so if you're ready, I'm ready, and we'll go ahead and start mixing in the ingredients. So I want to get my whisk. We have different size whisks over here. I'll show you very quickly the different kinds of whisks that we have. The real tiny whisk, that's kind of too small for today. We have this great big whisk. I don't need that either. This one is just right. So what we'll do is just kind of whisk the flour around, make sure there are no lumps in it so that it mixes together well. Then what I'll do is I'll add in the salt, just kind of shake it in there, mix it in. Then I'll add in the baking powder. It's again 3 teaspoons of baking powder. Mix that all together. Those of you who are children and are watching with a parent or an older sibling or a grandparent or a guardian helping you, this is sort of a cool thing to do. When my daughter Lauren was little, I used to let her do all of the mixing. I would ask her to do that, and she was very good at mixing with the whisk. So now that we have all of the dry ingredients, tap off the excess flour, set that over here. And what I'm going to do is take out 2 standard knives, just 2 knives that we would typically use to eat a meal. And I will be using these to cut in the butter. Again, 6 tablespoons of butter. The neat thing about butter is you really don't have to work hard to measure it, because if you get standard butter sticks, they come with the measurements right on the wrapper. So we have 6 tablespoons. We've let it sit out for a little while, so it's not quite so hard. That makes it somewhat easier to cut into the dry ingredients that we've prepared. So you'll see we've got roughly 6 tablespoons here. And all I'm going to do is take the 2 knives with the blade end down, never up, don't want to hurt yourself, blade end down, and we just start cutting in sort of a scissor cut, crisscrossing the butter. We're going to continue to do that until it's all cut up. When you read recipes, oftentimes it'll tell you to cut in the chilled butter until it is pea-sized. And so that means we want to cut it and mix it around as we go until the small pieces of butter are coated in the dry ingredients and they appear very small, pea-sized. So I have a ways to go. This will take a little bit. Again, this is something that children should always have a parent with them before attempting, because although the knives are dull, and I do have the blades facing down away from me, always have to be very careful, safety conscious when using any kind of implements in the kitchen. As you can see, the butter is cutting in pretty nicely. It always helps if you let the butter sit out for about an hour before mixing it. If it comes directly out of the refrigerator, it's so cold and hard, it's really difficult to get it to mix in nicely with dry ingredients like flour, salt, and baking powder. So what I do is I'll go ahead and finish, scrape off the knives, have all the excess butter here. Makes a nice ringing sound. Or it actually hurts your ears. Melissa is squinting as I'm doing it. So now what I'll do is I will get a nice spatula. These kinds of spatulas are almost in everybody's home. And make sure all of the dry ingredients with the butter is pulled away from the edges of the bowl. And then we make a nice well. It's called a well. You just sort of push the ingredients to the side. And if you look, see there, that's where I'm going to pour 3/4 of a cup of milk, right in that well. And this is where it's helpful if you're doing this for the first time or you're a younger person. It's always helpful to have somebody help you there. Stack those bowls and get them out of the way. So now what we have is the final ingredient mixed in. And what I will then do with the spatula is pull the dry ingredients from the side. Butter is all mixed in. We're just going to mix this a bit until it becomes like a pastry dough. And so that doesn't take too long. It's nice to have this kind of glass bowl, but you don't have to. A lot of times if I'm making these quick in the morning and I have a large group of people here joining us, not going to happen these days until we're all able to gather in large groups again. But when I do have a large group, I will use a very large plastic bowl because I might double or even triple this recipe. Interesting thing is that the recipes always tell you that it should make between 10 and 12 biscuits. But I like mine a little bigger and thicker. So this should make somewhere around 8 nice sized biscuits. If I flatten them down, we could get to the 10. But I like thick biscuits that rise up nice and high and get golden brown. So I get my knife, one of my knives again, and we'll scrape off the spatula. Just like that, get rid of all the excess. See, it's kind of sticky. It's almost like Play-Doh consistency. And one thing to remember is you never ever want to eat raw dough. Now this doesn't have eggs in it, but nonetheless, raw dough is not something we should consume. So I'm done with these two. I'll put them back in the sink. Now what I have is my biscuit dough. I have my gloves on, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to knead it a little bit. Kneading is where you just sort of push it. And if you like Play-Doh, this is really cool. So what you can do is you push it all together, make sure all of the last traces of the ingredients are mixed in. You can hear it's just slightly damp, and that's because of the milk. And then the butter gets a little greasy, and that helps to pick up all the excess pieces of the dry ingredients that might be stuck to the side. So you can see, now we have a nice ball of biscuit dough. I'm done with this big bowl, so I'll put it over here. And now I'm ready to begin pressing out the dough and actually cutting the biscuits to bake in the oven. So I'll get it into a nice ball. I'll set that right there. Before I do, I want to add a little extra flour so that I can press the dough out without it sticking. Because like Play-Doh, and again, this is really fun if you want to do it. You can push it and you can mash it around like that. Some people like to use a rolling pin for biscuits. I don't, because a rolling pin can press out the dough too thin. That's great for cookies, but biscuits need to be nice and thick so that there's a lot of substance and they can rise and get a nice golden brown. So we press that out. You'll see I've got it nice and floured so that it's not sticking to my pastry board. And you don't care, it doesn't matter, you don't have to worry about whether it looks perfect. In fact, when you make something from scratch, it should never look perfect. It should look as if you really spent some time making that for your family. So now we have our biscuit dough pressed out. That's about as far as I want to go. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to get our cookie pan. This one is a stone cookie pan. I like stone because stone tends to bake more evenly. And you can see in the past where I've baked biscuits and Melissa has baked cookies. In fact, if you look, you can see 1, 2, 3. You can count with me. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So this kind of cookie pan can cook 12 cookies, 12 biscuits really nicely, and they'll brown up really well on both the top and the bottom. So now what we'll do is we'll take our biscuit cutter. Again, it could look like this, or it could be a metal can, anything that is a nice round shape. And all I'm going to do is set it on top of the dough, and either with one hand or two, but I'll use two, just press down. And then you give it a little shake. It's always important to give it the little shake, because when you give it the shake, it helps it to separate from the rest of the dough. Now it's starting to really look like a biscuit, but it's still not baked, so we don't want to eat it. And I'll put that over here. And then I'll take my biscuit cutter, try to place it as closely as you can, and press again, and shake. You can hear it shaking along the pastry board. And tap it out, and set it over here. Now keep doing that. Press, shake. See, I lift it and it's still in, so you can see it in there. See that? And you can pop it right out if you want. It's about the size of a hockey puck, a little smaller. Press and shake. Now I'm doing it with one hand. Press and shake, and pop it out. And there it goes. I always like the one right in the middle. The middle is the thickest part of the dough. So that one, to me, is going to make the best biscuit in the batch.
That one's mine.
Oh, well, so it's spoken for already. Press it again. Tap it out. Looks like I have room right there for one. Press it, shake, tap it out. How many do we have, Melissa? Can you count them?
7.
7. Now what do I do with all of this? Do we throw that away? No, we don't. So what I do with this is going to make another ball of dough. Again, a little more flour sprinkled around on my pastry board. And again, if you like Play-Doh, this is a fun thing to do. You can roll it. You can see it's much smaller because I've already removed 7 biscuits. But we try to press it all together again, all those leftover pieces. And now we're going to press it and cross your hands just like this. Press. Press down. Press as hard as you want. Until it gets to a thickness that you and your family like. And then I take my biscuit cutter again, press, shake, tap. See if I can get 3 out of this. Press, shake. Oh, didn't need to tap, it slipped right out. Let's put that over here. Yep. There's the third one. Press, shake, and tap. And we're going to do it a third time. And now we have just a small little ball. So we went from a great big ball of dough to a medium-sized ball. And now we're at a small little ball of dough. So I'm going to same thing, third time. I'm going to press this out and probably only going to get one nice round biscuit out of that one. You can see the smaller it gets, you see the pieces are harder and harder to press together. That's okay. When it bakes, that'll just make little creases on the biscuit. Press, shake, and don't even need to tap. And this is the last little bit. So you can just press it out like that. If you really want to, you can press it out. If you can see that inside there. If you want, you don't have to do this. But some people like it to be just so. And there's our last biscuit. And so, if you look, remember, that's the one Melissa's already claimed. That's the middle one, that great big thick one. If you look, they get a little thinner as we go. Those will be for people who have already had a nice big one. Those are the seconds. So how many do we have? 1, 2, 3. Count with me. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Or we could go 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and do multiplication times 1, 2, 3. 4 times 3 make 12. And so now we're ready to place these in the oven. I've preheated the oven to 450 degrees, which is nice and hot. This is where you really have to be careful. This is not for children. This is where an adult would need to assist you, because we have a hot oven back here that's 450 degrees, and I'm going to open it and place these biscuits inside, and they will bake for about 12 minutes. 12 minutes, give or take, and I'll set the timer so that we can keep an eye on them when we make our shortbread. And when they're done baking, they will have risen, and they'll be nice and brown on top. So let's put them in and let them bake. Again, the oven is very hot on the inside, not on the outside. So we open it, and I can feel the heat coming out. And you have an adult place these inside for you. There they are, ready to bake. Close the lid nice and tight. And I have it at 450 degrees. That's very hot, so be very safe and cautious around an oven. And what I like to do is I like to turn on the light. Did the light come on, Melissa?
Yes.
Great. So the light comes on and I can keep an eye on them. because even though they're baking at a set temperature for a set amount of time, I want to keep my eye on them. I just like to see how they're going. And I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. 1, 0, and press start. And so there it begins, the countdown until we have warm biscuits from the oven. You can see them baking. So I mentioned earlier, one of the great joys of making homemade biscuits is that they can be modified for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they can even be modified for dessert, making shortbread. And you'll see here, Melissa sliced up some nice fresh berries for me. Those are beautiful. And we set them aside because we can make strawberry shortcake. Strawberries are in the grocery market. If you are doing pickup or delivery, they're sold in about a pint, that's 16 ounces, and they're coming from Florida for the most part. In about 6 weeks, hopefully, fresh local strawberries will be in season, and there is nothing like the taste of fresh local strawberries. But they're not in season yet, so we have that here. I also have Melissa's powdered sugar sifter. You don't have to have one of these, but when we make the strawberry shortcake, you can put powdered sugar on the strawberries like that. See how it comes out? Looks like little snowflakes falling. If you don't have a sifter, you just use a spoon and shake it out on the berries. You can also use whipped cream if that's something you prefer. So I have the same ingredients that I had for the biscuits. So I have roughly 2 cups of flour. I have my salt. Now, if I'm making shortbread, I make 2 additions. When we made biscuits, I added half a teaspoon of salt. For shortbread, it requires a full teaspoon. So there's the full teaspoon. There's my baking powder. 3 teaspoons again of baking powder, just as we did for the biscuits. With the biscuits, we just added those 3 dry ingredients. Shortbread needs to have a little sweetener added to it. So we add 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar. Granulated, that's a strange word. Just regular sugar that you would use in your house. If you have a sugar bowl or a sugar bucket, you just sprinkle in the sugar. It's 1 tablespoon of standard sugar. That's going to give the biscuit dough a sweeter flavor, so it can be used for dessert and shortbread. There's my whisk again. This is the fun part. The part all kids can do, young and old. Mix in the dry ingredients. Tap off the side. So everything is mixed in, including the sugar. I'm going to get 2 new knives this time. I'm going to cut in the butter. Some of it's really soft here. That makes it even easier to use. Same amount. We have the same 6 tablespoons of butter. There's that sound Melissa loves. You'll see as I drop the butter in, I don't put it all in one place. It makes it easier to mix in with the knives if I drop it in different locations. This one's been sitting out for a little bit, so it's nice and soft. It makes it really easy to mix in. Again, if you know you're going to make biscuits and you set the butter out for about an hour, it gets that nice consistency. So when you go to cut it in, again, as we did before, blades down, not up, always down, away from you. Keep blades away from you. And have an adult do this part, or at least help you do this part. You cut the butter in, again, until it's, what size was that, Melissa?
Peas.
Pea-sized. One of Melissa's favorite vegetables.
Not.
Is peas. Oh, she loves peas. She hates peas. I love peas. peas and pearl onions. Yummy together. All right, butter was softer this time, so didn't have to spend as much time cutting it in. You can see it's all mixed in. Have my spatula ready. And again, 3/4 of a cup of milk. I'm going to save some of it back this time, just in case. I don't want it to get too sticky and wet. You don't have to do this, but sometimes when I make shortbread, it doesn't need, for whatever reason, quite as much milk. So it may not use all 3/4 of a cup for the shortbread. Mix it in. Again, the spatula's nice and soft, so anybody can do this part. Pull in the ingredients. How much longer for our biscuits, Melissa?
Looks like 4 minutes and 24 seconds.
I don't know if you can see over there, but they are really rising nicely.
Watch out.
That's why I like to keep an eye on them as they bake.
There we go.
10 minutes is sort of a range. They may not be done, but I always like to set the timer less than what I think it's going to require to bake them, because then they won't get overdone. All right, so I'm pulling that together, and I think, as I thought, I don't need all of that milk. That was 3/4 of a cup. We left a little bit there, not much. Melissa loves that sound. And again, keeping the gloves on. Always handle food in a safe, sanitary way. See, it's very similar to the biscuit dough, only this will have a sweet flavor. Don't taste it, you just have to take my word for it.
Nora O'Connell says that you should have your own baking show.
Thank you, Nora. Anybody else commenting?
Lots.
Aw.
Somebody wants the recipe.
We will post the recipe, I promise you. I'll tell you a little bit about the recipes that I tend to use. So, as I told you, I grew up on a farm, and my dad and I, my brother, we would farm from early in the morning until sometimes 8 or 9 at night, well past dark, and then I'd come in and I'd do my homework. Now, I played in the band, so I always had to have time to practice my clarinet, and I played baseball in the spring. This time of year is very busy on a farm, very, very, very busy. Some of you who are home now and live on farms are probably being recruited by your parents to spend a lot of time working on the farm. Our farm did not have animals. We were grain farmers. My dad, growing up, his family always had Black Angus beef cattle. And Black Angus beef cattle are notorious for breaking out of their fenced-in area. And my father had memories of being a young person and having to go all the way back to the woods, about a half a mile behind the house, usually in terrible weather, driving rain or snow, and try to get all of the Black Angus back, because when one would break through the fence, they played follow the leader all the way back. So he swore, you can see I've got my dough all in a nice ball now, he swore he would never have animals. We had dogs and cats and all kinds of domestic animals, but we farmed corn, soybeans, wheat, and so there was always work to do. And Mom would make us homemade breakfasts in the morning because we would work long hours. Lunch was usually pull the tractor over under a tree, eat a quick sandwich, gulp down something to drink, and get back at it. But breakfast was a hearty meal because we needed to have energy for the day. And my father always loved biscuits. And one addition that he liked that I never liked, some of you may have had, was chipped beef on biscuits. Chipped beef on toast. It was one of his favorites. It's not the healthiest. It's not something I would ever make in our home, but I can still see my mom preparing that for my dad. I think on those days I usually ate cereal. So I now have my shortbread dough ready. We've got 25 seconds left, and I can just tell by looking, Melissa, if you can zoom in, you can see that those biscuits are not going to be finished in 15 seconds. So I'm not even going to wait for the alarm to go off. I'm going to cancel it, and I'm going to add 3 more minutes. There. Had a little trouble. Forgot how I did the timer there. See, everybody makes mistakes. That's part of being human. So the biscuits will bake for another 3 minutes or so. And you can see they're nice and thick, but they haven't even begun to brown yet. So it'll take a little bit for them to brown. When I make shortbread for dessert, strawberry shortcake or peach shortcake in the summertime, a lot of times what I'll do is, just as we did before, put down a little bit of flour. If you don't have flour, you can use cornstarch to help keep it from sticking to the pastry board. Don't want to do it on the counter though. You want to have something away from the counter that you keep clean to press out your pastry dough. So sometimes if I'm just making for a large group, I'll take a shortcut. And the shortcut is pressing it out like this, again like Play-Doh. It's kind of fun to push it. You can even make faces in it if you want. And it's smiling at you. So you can press out the dough, and sometimes I'll just press it out like that, and I'll put it right into a cake pan, a circular cake pan, and I'll bake it just like that. And then when it's done, again, it cooks for about 10 or 12 minutes, then I'll just cut it like I would cut a piece of pie, so that everyone would get a small wedge. But for today, because we have a little bit of extra time, I have a second cookie pan, just like the first one. And we'll cut out individual sized biscuits. Now this time I'm going to do it a little differently. This time I'm going to cut them all, cut and shake, cut and shake. There's the middle one, cut and shake. That's mine this time. Cut and shake. And I only got 5 that time. See? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Somebody wants to know, what is our family's favorite dish that you make them?
Family's favorite dish that I make? I would have to say the favorite in our house. That's when Lauren comes over. Lauren's in college now, but she comes over sometimes on the weekends, and some of her friends will come. And our favorite, I think, as a family, a little more, it's a little sticky, see? I mentioned I didn't need all that milk. I'm glad I didn't use it all because the dough is kind of sticky. You also don't want to handle it too much because it'll keep it from rising if you handle it too much. Our favorite is waffles. And
Breakfast.
waffles are so yummy. I make them from scratch. And I whip up the egg whites. That's the secret to making fluffy, thick waffles. You break an egg and put it in, but you separate it. Maybe someday I'll show you that one, but your parents probably know how to do it. You separate it until the egg white is out in a separate bowl, and you whip it with an electric mixer, and it gets fluffy. And it adds a lot of airiness to the waffles. All right, so that's an annoying alarm. So hit stop. And Melissa, I don't think they're done yet. So I'm going to add 2 more minutes to our timer. And that'll give me just enough time to finish the shortbread. So the shortbread, I didn't make quite as many. I don't think it's going to make more than about 8.
So Mrs. Hendricks from JBM wants to know, what is
Mrs. Hendricks?
what is your favorite thing to bake?
I think you could tell I love making biscuits because they're pretty easy to make, and they're so applicable to different kinds of meals. But after biscuits, my favorite is to make homemade pies. And so when I make pies, I make my own crust. And I think where I was headed earlier and I lost my way was to tell you that my mom always used the joy of cooking. And so most of these recipes are from the joy of cooking. And when I graduated college and I started teaching, I was just 21 years old, and my mom gave me a copy of the joy of cooking. And I still use that same one to this day. But the recipes that I use are mostly found in the joy of cooking. Sometimes I'll add a few pieces to it that's, something our family likes. But I'll use the basic pie dough recipe in the joy of cooking. And I make our pumpkin pies. I've made pecan. I love to make apple pies. And then in the summertime when peaches come into season, and before them blueberries, I'll make fresh fruit pies. So those are my other favorite to make. I really enjoy doing that. All right, so
They're done.
are they?
I think.
Well, I'm gonna sneak a peek here and just open up the oven. You're supposed to leave the oven shut until everything is done, but I'll cheat and show you. So you look at them, and Melissa's right. So before I reach in, I'm going to turn off the oven. It's still very hot. Doesn't mean the oven has cooled. And now I go into this drawer here where we have, and so sometimes if your hands are really small, mine aren't that big, but they're large enough to do this with one hand. If your hands are small, again, this is what an adult has to do for you. But if you have smaller hands, you probably need 2 oven mitts, and you pull them out with 2 hands. But I can handle it with 1. So I'll set that right on top. And I'll take our shortbread, ended up with 9 and just this little tiny piece here. And I'll put that in to replace the biscuits. Shut the oven door. I'm going to reset the oven to 450. If we weren't baking a second batch, we'd leave the oven off. Oven will warm up. And I'm going to set the timer this time for 12 minutes. And let those bake. Take the oven mitt off. And now what I'll do is you can use any kind of serving tray. So we're going to get one of Melissa's stoneware plates. And over here I have our spatulas, different kinds of spatulas. I like this one. It's a nice sturdy one. And so what we'll do, never touching this pan. This pan is stoneware, so it will stay hot for a long time. If you don't have stoneware, you can also use a metal pan. We have those as well. I'll set that in, put it back later. Either way, whether it's stoneware or it's a metal pan, it will retain the heat from that oven for quite a while, so we don't touch it. And you can see what I like about the stoneware is nothing sticks. I haven't forgotten, that one's Melissa's. So we're going to put that on its own special plate. And that one will be for Melissa.
Yum.
And then I'll get a second plate. You see, I just take them right off. You can see. Give a close-up on your biscuit, Melissa, if you would. Show them. See how golden brown it is on top? And then you can see the flakes. It should be nice and flaky where you see the biscuit starts to separate. And you can always tell homemade biscuits from those that are done in a can. Because if you remember earlier, I said you don't want it to look perfect. You want it to look like you made it. Remember when I finished up, that was the last one. You could tell definitely that one was made by hand. But most of the biscuits that we cut early are nice and thick, brown on the bottom, brown on top, and you can see you won't even need to cut that. That doesn't even need to be cut. It's so flaky. See the steam from the heat? You just pop it open. And so what I like to do is I take my butter, There's my biscuit. This is my favorite. I'll have stick butter. You can use light butter. You can use butter substitutes, whatever you want, or no butter. It's entirely up to you. I'll get another knife. When I'm making them for breakfast, now that is a large pat of butter. I probably don't need all of that. So we'll cut that in half. And I cover it up. Just let it sit for a minute. What do you think it's going to do while it sits there? I wonder what it's going to look like when I lift the top off the biscuit again. I wonder what's happening to that soft butter. Remember, that butter's been sitting out for over an hour now. I wonder what's going to happen to that butter while it's sitting. Let's take a peek. What do you think? What do you think it's going to look like? It's already started to melt. So if I cover it back up and leave it, if I left it long enough, it would just melt entirely and soak right into the biscuit. That one's going to be hard to do, but the rest of them will. So I'll finish it, spread it in. You'll see the butter soaking into the flaky biscuit. Any kind of honey, that's my favorite. You can use jam. In the fall, during apple harvest, apple butter is delicious on warm biscuits. And so I don't spare the honey. I like a lot of honey.
Lauren's going to be jealous.
No, she should be here. She has class today. And so you could either put it back on top and eat the whole thing, or if you want to savor it longer, the way I do, just like this. Now that is delicious. Melissa, you want to taste the other half? I love honey.
Oh my God.
So really, that's how you make biscuits. And when our shortbread is done, it's going to look just like this. And you can sprinkle strawberries with the powdered sugar on top of them and eat them as a dessert. Or if you just like sweet biscuits, you can have those. Now, if you have a family member who can't have sugar for a variety of reasons, then you can stick to regular biscuits without the sugar, or you could use the sugar substitute. Entirely up to your family how you want to approach that. But these are the way I like to make homemade biscuits for breakfast, for lunch, or for dinner with gravy and kind of heavy meal, or you can have them as a dessert, using them for shortbread. While those are finishing, were there any questions, Melissa?
Let's see.
You should never talk with your mouth full as I'm doing now.
Rude.
I'm gonna throw the biscuits away. I'm sorry. I'm gonna throw my gloves away in the trash. And because I touched the trash can.
So somebody asked, are you going to do any more cooking videos? Somebody wants you to do waffles.
You might be able to do some more of these. I know that we have so many people who have signed up in the district to bring you virtual field trips every Friday at 3 o'clock. And I know that starting next week and until we come back, you have so many different people who are going to be presenting a virtual field trip to you. It's going to be so much fun. I might be able to work in another day here and there, other than a Friday, after the virtual school day ends at 3:30. And we might be able to make some other items for you, and I'll share the recipes. Again, I will make sure that we post that recipe so you know how to make biscuits just like this, or shortbread, which will look very similar, but will have a sweeter flavor. Any other questions while I eat my warm biscuit?
Somebody said you need your own virtual cooking channel.
Thank you.
Somebody wants to know the honey brand. It's just simple Food Line brand.
You can get all kinds of honey. There's raw honey, there's local honey. I know there are various shops, once they reopen for visitors in Delaware, that sell Delaware-made honey. And it's always nice to support local farmers who are growing products. So you can get a variety of types of honey. Some have flavor infused. Some stores have flavor infused honey, like orange honey or mint honey. That's just your basic honey.
So somebody wants to know where you got your chef's jacket.
Okay.
Interesting story.
So you'll see. You see that? So Mrs. Deb Judy, is wonderful with crafts. I am not. I like to bake and cook. She's wonderful with crafts, and she has a Cricut, and she can make just about any kind of design on clothing. Hold that thought for a minute. I'm going to give these another minute. Nope, they're okay. It wasn't. That was just the heat.
Yeah.
It's back up to 450. So I just purchased this online, and Mrs. Judy took and put the decal on it for me right here. And so I got this a couple of years ago. We were getting ready to plan graduation for our seniors a few years ago, and several of us decided we wanted to serve breakfast to the seniors the morning of their graduation. And we've done that ever since. And so for that very first occasion, I bought a baker's outfit. It comes with a cap too. I didn't wear the cap today, maybe next time. But we served breakfast, and we've done that the morning of graduation for our graduates. They have to report to the high school. They're in the cafeteria anyway, so Mr. Holt and the entire administrative team and the child nutrition team all pitch in. Even some teachers joined us this past year and came on the food line, and we served so many different breakfast items to our seniors. And so that's when I got this, and Mrs. Judy put the feathered S patch right on it.
I think they're done.
Think they're done? All right, and I'm done with my biscuit. Where did I put my mitt? There it is. Get my mitt. Slide that one over. It's still warm to the touch. And turn off the oven, turn off the timer. And those biscuits are nice and brown. Those are shortbread. And I'll bring one over. There's the nice middle one. And so, again, you see it's hot, but not so hot that I can't touch it. But you can see right where it wants to be broken in two. And so we pop it open nice and flaky. We're going to put some strawberries on it. Just like that. So now it's like a dessert. And either whipped cream or powdered sugar. I like this. You can see it looks like little snowflakes. You can really make it decorative. Put a little extra all around the side, more or less, depending on how sweet you want them. And now we had breakfast biscuits, and we have dessert, and you have the recipe, and I'll finish with a bite of strawberry shortcake. Delicious. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you soon. Be safe. Enjoy the time with your family. Enjoy the instructional virtual lessons that your teachers are giving you. And I will see you very soon. All of us will. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.